The Sphinx, the majestic guardian of Giza, has been surrounded by an aura of mystery since ancient times, and one of the most persistent legends is that something extraordinary is supposedly hidden under it. Even in ancient times, there were rumors that under the paws of the Sphinx there were secret chambers and underground passages leading to treasures or ancient knowledge. In the 20th century, interest in this idea flared up with renewed vigor. Various researchers, archaeologists, and even esotericists suggested that a certain Hall of Chronicles could be stored inside, in which the knowledge of ancient civilizations, perhaps even Atlantis, was encrypted. In the 1920s, Egyptian workers told archaeologists about voids under the statue, and in the 1970s, seismological studies actually showed the presence of anomalies in the base. These data fueled speculation that there could be chambers there. The most popular version claims that under the right paw is hidden a library left by priests for future generations, and in it are texts about the origin of civilization. Skeptics believe that such voids can only be natural voids in limestone or the results of erosion. Egyptian authorities did not allow large-scale excavations in this area for a long time, which only fueled the rumors. By the end of the 20th century, some researchers claimed that the data from ground-penetrating radars indicated artificial structures, but there was no definitive confirmation. Thus, the question of what is buried under the Sphinx remains open. Some believe in secret halls with wisdom and artifacts, others in ordinary natural voids, but none of the hypotheses has yet been definitively proven. What was the most terrible Egyptian curse? Among the many legends about Egyptian curses, the most terrible was the curse of eternal restlessness of the soul. The ancient Egyptians believed that after death a person goes to Duat, the afterlife, where his heart is weighed by the god Anubis. If the heart was light, the soul got a chance for eternal existence. If heavy, it awaited destruction. But in the case of a curse, the soul was deprived of the opportunity to pass this trial at all. It could not be reborn, did not find peace, and wandered forever between worlds, deprived of memory and appearance. For the Egyptians, this was more terrible than physical death, illness, or disaster, because it was believed that a person lives as long as he is remembered and as long as his soul has a path to eternity. Such a curse was often mentioned on the walls of tombs. The violator is deprived of peace and will be forever haunted by spirits and gods. People believe that the cursed person would never be able to reunite with his ancestors after death. His name would disappear from the memory of his descendants, and his personality would dissolve. This was tantamount to complete annihilation, a fear that was deeply rooted in the Egyptian worldview. It is no coincidence that it was this mythical horror that inspired many stories about the curse of the pharaohs. When mysterious deaths were recorded in the 20th century after the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb, many contemporaries decided that archaeologists had been struck by this ancient curse. Why do mummies scream? When we hear the expression screaming mummy, something creepy immediately comes to mind. A face frozen in a grimace, an open mouth, and the impression that the person is really screaming through the millennia. In reality, this phenomenon is explained more by physiology and the mummification process than by mysticism. One of the most famous screaming mummies is a find in Egypt, in the Valley of the Kings, where in the 19th century archaeologists discovered a body with a wide-open mouth and an expression of horror on its face. Versions immediately appeared about a painful death, a curse, or a violent ritual. However, scientists explain, during mummification or natural drying of tissues, the facial muscles lose tone, the jaw hangs down, and the mouth can remain open. The same thing sometimes happens with modern bodies during improper burial. But the story does not end there. Analysis has shown that some screaming mummies did die under strange circumstances. For example, the Cairo Museum houses the so-called mummy of unknown man whose mouth is open and whose body looks distorted. Scientists have found traces of poison in the stomach, and the mummification itself was carried out extremely carelessly, without removing internal organs or traditional rituals. This gave reason to assume that the person was executed or poisoned, and his body was deliberately dishonored, deprived of a worthy rite. According to one version, this was the son of Pharaoh Ramses III, who participated in a conspiracy against his father. His scream could have been the last expression of horror before death. In other cases, the mummy's scream is just an accident. When drying, the skin contracts, revealing the teeth and creating the illusion of a grimace of pain. The combination of an open mouth and empty eye sockets makes a frightening impression on the viewer, as if the dead person is frozen in a moment of suffering. Thus, mummies do not actually scream. It is a game of anatomy and circumstances. But it is worth acknowledging. Such finds have given rise to many legends and have become a source of myths about curses and sinister secrets of the ancient Egyptians. Why did people eat mummies? The history of eating mummies is one of the strangest and darkest episodes in European culture. During the Renaissance and subsequent centuries, Egyptian mummies were believed to have miraculous properties. Apothecaries sold powder from ground remains as a cure for a variety of ailments, from headaches and bleeding to epilepsy and plague. People believed that bodies preserved by resins and bitumen contained a special life force that could prolong health and life. This powder, called mumia, could be found in any self-respecting pharmacy in Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries. It was added to drinks, ointments, and even cosmetics. Not only commoners, but also kings used this remedy. The French monarch Francis I carried mummy powder with him and took it when he was ill. Doctors of that time claimed that particles of ancient human bodies, soaked in resins, acted as a powerful remedy for internal inflammations and injuries. For the nobility, eating mummies became part of fashion, a kind of expensive and exotic medicine that emphasized status. Gradually, the practice went to extremes. Artists and alchemists experimented with mummies, trying to make paints from them. This is how the rare pigment mummy brown was created, obtained from human remains. It was used in painting until the 19th century, until synthetic substitutes appeared. But the most shocking thing is that mummies were not only ground, but also actually eaten. In Europe in the 17th century, there were feasts where nobles tried pieces of mummies, believing that this would add strength and protect against diseases. Today, this seems like wild blasphemy, but back then it was part of medical science. The demand was so great that genuine mummies from Egypt were in short supply, and traders began using the bodies of criminals or poor dead people, passing them off as ancient. Over the centuries, vast numbers of genuine artifacts were destroyed for the sake of misconceptions. It was not until the 19th century that medicine abandoned this practice, but the memory of it remains as one of the darkest paradoxes of European history. The question of whether there is anything inside the Great Sphinx of Giza remains one of the most mysterious topics in Egyptology. The Sphinx itself is a gigantic limestone sculpture, about 73 meters long and over 20 meters high, carved directly from a single rock. Over the centuries, there have been many legends and assumptions about hidden chambers, hiding places, and secret passages that could shed light on the mysteries of ancient Egypt. Already in the 19th century, some researchers assumed that there could be a hidden room inside the Sphinx. Archaeologists of that time noted unusual cracks and voids in its body, which could indicate artificial cavities. These guesses were reinforced by the stories of ancient authors who claimed that the Egyptians often hid secret repositories of knowledge and treasures under monuments. In the 20th century, interest in this topic flared up with renewed vigor. In the 1920s, during restoration work, tunnels and depressions were discovered in the area of the Sphinx's paws. Some of them turned out to be ancient, while others were the result of later excavations and restorations. But the most high-profile discoveries are associated with research using modern technologies. In the 1990s, scientists from Japan and the United States used ground-penetrating radar and seismic exploration to look inside the monument without destroying it. The results were sensational. The presence of anomalous voids under and around the Sphinx, especially in the area of the paws and under the foundation, was recorded. These findings gave rise to theories about the Hall of Records, a mythical archive of ancient knowledge, allegedly left by the Atlanteans or early Egyptian priests. Supporters of alternative history claim that this is where information about the origin of civilization may be stored. However, official Egyptology treats these statements with caution. Most archaeologists believe that the voids may be natural caverns in the limestone or the result of erosion. At the same time, Egyptian authorities are reluctant to allow new research, which fuels public interest and gives rise to new rumors. So, we can say this. Yes, there are voids and structures inside and under the Sphinx that have not yet been fully explored. But science cannot yet call them secret rooms with treasures or ancient manuscripts. The mystery of the Sphinx remains unsolved, and this is what makes it a symbol of the eternal mystery of ancient Egypt. What are the 7 Egyptian curses? The idea of a curse occupied a special place in ancient Egyptian culture, especially when it came to the tombs of pharaohs and priests. The Egyptians believed that the afterlife was closely connected to the world of the living, and the peace of the dead must be protected from any intrusion. Inscriptions on sarcophagi and tombs often contain warnings promising imminent death to anyone who disturbs the peace. Contemporaries believed that such texts possessed mystical powers, and so the legend of the so-called 7 Egyptian curses was born, each of which is associated with a certain form of punishment for violators. The first curse promised sudden death to anyone who dared to desecrate the tomb. It was believed that the spirit of the pharaoh would rise to personally punish the impudent robber. The second curse concerned illness. The violator could be struck by a mysterious ailment resembling an infection or poisoning. Perhaps it had a real basis. The ancient tombs preserved fungal spores and bacteria that were deadly to humans. The third curse promised madness. The intruder into the sanctuary began to lose his mind. He was haunted by visions and nightmares. The fourth concerned loss. The robber or explorer's loved ones died, as if fate itself was taking away the most valuable thing from him. The fifth curse predicted infertility and the extinction of the family, which for ancient man was more terrible than death. The sixth curse was associated with fire. It was believed that anyone who touched the body of a mummy or artifacts from the tomb could die in a fire or other catastrophe. The seventh curse is the curse of eternal restlessness. The soul of the violator after death will allegedly not be able to find peace, will wander in Duat, the Egyptian afterlife, with no hope of rebirth. These 7 curses have become part of mythology, and the real story of the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb only strengthened the belief in them. After its opening, several people from Lord Carnarvon's team died under strange circumstances, and the press of that time readily associated this with the ancient curse. Today, archaeologists explain many things by natural causes: infections, toxic substances, and stress. However, the myth of Egyptian curses continues to live, turning each expedition into a dramatic story on the verge of mysticism and reality. Why is it forbidden to photograph a mummy? The ban on photographing mummies is not just a formality or a whim of museums. In fact, there are several reasons, and they combine science, culture, and ethics. Firstly, the scientific aspect. Mummies are incredibly fragile. Their tissues have been preserved for thousands of years, but they are easily destroyed by the slightest change in conditions. The flash of a camera emits light and heat, which can damage the structure of the skin, dried out by resins and time. Even if one photo seems harmless, thousands of tourists with cameras create a constant impact that accelerates destruction. Therefore, large museums, for example, the British Museum in London or the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, prohibit photographing mummies with flash. Secondly, the ethical side. For Egyptians, a mummy is not an exhibit, but a person who had a life, a family, and a belief in the afterlife. Undressing the body and putting it on display is a controversial issue in itself. Therefore, photographing it is perceived as another act of disturbing the peace of the deceased. Scientists and custodians of cultural heritage believe that this is a way to show respect for ancient people. The third reason is sacred. For the ancient Egyptians, preserving the body was part of the path to eternal life. It was believed that the destruction of the mummy could deprive the soul of the opportunity to be reborn in the afterlife. Modern Egyptians, especially religious people, perceive public photographing of mummies as desecration. Therefore, bans are often supported not only by museums, but also by society. Finally, there is a purely practical side. Tourists often take photos not only for themselves, but also for sale, blogs, or souvenirs. This reduces the value of official scientific and museum publications. Therefore, some institutions protect their exhibits from a commercial point of view. However, in recent years, technologies have emerged that make it possible to circumvent the bans. Scientists create 3D scans of mummies, digital reconstructions of faces, virtual tours of tombs. Thanks to this, anyone can see ancient remains in the smallest detail without risking damaging them. So gradually strict prohibitions find a modern alternative. Were there really mummy unwrapping parties? In the 19th century, a strange and creepy fashion emerged in Europe, the so-called mummy unwrapping parties. People from high society would gather in halls. Guests would come in expensive suits and evening dresses, and the main event would be the removal of bandages from a real Egyptian mummy. This was considered entertainment and at the same time a sign of initiation into the secrets of antiquity. The most famous organizer of such evenings was Thomas Joseph Pettigrew, whom his contemporaries nicknamed Mummy Pettigrew. In London, he would stage entire performances with lectures and commentary, and the public, lords, military men, wealthy industrialists, would watch as a 1,000-year-old artifact disappeared before their eyes. Similar events were also held in private mansions. Thus, in the house of Lord Lonsdale, the unwrapping of a mummy was accompanied by music and champagne, and the bandages were given to guests as souvenirs. In France, such shows became a fashionable attraction. Tickets were sold in Parisian salons of the 19th century, and spectators saw how the mummy literally turned to dust before their eyes. Newspapers wrote about it as a strange mixture of science and horror. In Scotland in 1833, at the Royal Medical Society of Edinburgh, the unwrapping of a mummy turned into a scandal. Many considered it an outrage, but the organizers justified it with scientific goals. This entertainment became especially popular in London in the mid-19th century, where wealthy families specially bought mummies from antiquities dealers and unwrapped them right in their homes. This was a sign of status, a kind of symbol of wealth. Some remains later ended up in museums, but most were destroyed for the sake of momentary public curiosity. Today, historians call that era a time of barbaric attitude towards Egyptian heritage. For a modern person, such entertainment seems wild, but in the 19th century, it was considered the pinnacle of secular fashion.